my beautiful friends. My name is Kim, and I hope you are having a fabulous day today. If you are interested in true crime like I am, I hope that you would consider hitting that subscribe button. Today, we are going to be talking about Adrian Jones. Adrian was only 7 years old when his life was taken in one of the worst ways I've ever heard. This story is extremely horrific because little Adrian was treated truly terrible before his death. When I looked into this case, I realized this young boy's story needs to be told. So let's talk about Adrian. But first, a word from our sponsor. Thanks so much to Casetify for sponsoring today's video. Casetify is all that and a bag of chips. Their phone cases are not only protective and aesthetically pleasing as well. There's so many cases to choose from. If you're crazy, funky, stylish, they have you. Reserved, quiet, low-key, they have so many styles you will love. If you are fancy, you can get your phone case personalized. There is typically your initials, but I did my name on this one. I put rock star on my main case as a reminder of all of you beautiful people. You can also pick the font. They really did think of everything. So yeah, they're cute, but do they protect your phone? Phones are so expensive. I need the assurance that my phone case will do its job. Casetify does just that with their protective lining case called Chi-Tech, which protects your phone from drops of over 9 feet. I have little munchkins that are always taking off with my phone, and every so often you hear a loud, distinct phone sound falling on the ground. They really have put these cases to the test, and it never breaks. Makes my heart jump out of my chest every time, but no breaks. They have wireless charging capability cases as well as 5G compatible. They have an antimicrobial coating which kills 99% of bacteria. Their impact and ultra impact cases are made from 65% recycled and plant-based materials with 100% recycled packaging, which is awesome. I need help picking out my favorite case. You guys let me know. This is the case that I got for my iPhone mini. This is a specific designer that they have, but it's just beautiful. It fits perfectly. I got this one that has my name on it, just in case I forget my name, you know. And then I also got this little camera, say cheese. And then, of course, the one that's on my phone now. They are all so beautiful. I cannot recommend them enough. Casetify is offering my audience 15% off your purchase when you go to www.casetify.com/Kimberly Flower. 15% off, you guys. Thanks to Casetify for sponsoring today's video, and a big thanks to you guys for listening and supporting my channel. Warning, today we're going to be talking about another very crimey child case. If you are sensitive to said topic, I will see you in my next one. Adrian Jones was born May 15, 2008 to his parents Diane Pierce and Michael Jones. Adrian was said by his family he loved his brothers and sisters. He liked playing football and was a sweet and loving boy. Adrian lived with his parents in Lawrence, Kansas for the first few years of his life. This is directly from Adrian's sister's Facebook posts, which applied to Adrian's start to life, and we will kind of set the stage with her quote. Quote, Adrian was born and everything seemed to be going pretty well. But then when I finished 6th grade, Mike, the dad in this case, he wanted to take his business farther. So he got his own business in Topeka and we followed him there. Now this was the downfall. Little did we know that he was really moving to Topeka because he was cheating on my mom and wanted to be closer to his mistress, Heather. One day he randomly texted my mom and broke up with her, as if she didn't deserve more respect than that. My mom was going to nursing school and Mike was paying for it. She was pregnant again with the last of us, Bella, and she was trying to better her life, and he was the income. He paid for everything until then. My mom became depressed. She went out every night. She was never home. I was stuck watching my siblings at the age of 12. I went to school looking like a hot mess because I was up all night with my siblings. But after a while, everything caught up to us, so we had to leave. We moved to Lawrence with one of my mom's close friends, and she furnished us an apartment, but my mom still didn't seem to be thankful enough. She had a boyfriend at the time, and he broke up with her, and of course, he was the income. I don't have much information on the guy because there was a new one every month, and they weren't to be trusted. So we lost our place and had to go live in a shelter. There was one bunk bed in the room. I shared mine with Adrian and Madison, and my mom was sleeping in another one with Bella. My mom liked that it was free food, free shelter, free everything. So she used and abused it. She stopped looking for jobs. She stopped coming back to tuck us into bed at nighttime. So that became my job. And may I add, I was pretty much living in the shelter alone with my siblings. After a long period of time living in this stranger-filled shelter, my mom met a new guy. His job was decent, and he could support other people, meaning my siblings and I. So my mom and him got an apartment together, and we were finally out of the shelter. Everything was fine and dandy, the way a honeymoon stage usually goes, but then he became abusive. I never really understood why my mom would go for these guys. She put me and my siblings at risk, and to be honest, I have no idea if one of my siblings were being SA'd because during this time period, I wanted out. I was barely home. I'm not sure if avoiding my family was the best idea because it seemed to give my mom an excuse as to why she needed breaks and why she needed to go out every day of the week. I just wanted out, and boy, did I get one. In August of 2012, my grandma found out about everything that had been happening. She called SRS, and my siblings and I was taken away from my mother. My grandma tried to take in all of us, but guess who finally stepped in and decided to have a say? Mike. He wouldn't let my grandma have Madison, Adrian, or Bella, so I watched them get in the car and leave, unquote. So that, like I said, was directly from her Facebook page, and of course, I'll leave the whole message below in my resources. It really does set the stage to the beginning of Adrian's life. So he's living with mom. They end up going to a shelter. She has abusive men time and time again. And then finally, Mike, the dad, steps in and says, I want my kids, and he takes them away from the grandma. So now we're up to the point where Adrian moves in with his dad. When Adrian was placed in his father's care at 2.5 years old, Michael was already married to Heather Jones. Heather told a story about what Adrian had said to her. He said he was being physically abused for days by a man who knew his biological mother, which could be the reason why after Adrian came to live with Heather and Michael, he was diagnosed with PTSD and severe emotional detachment. These are big diagnoses for a 3-year-old. When he first moved in with them, he was set up to sleep on the couch, which was the best accommodations Adrian had, to be honest. That didn't last long. Heather, the stepmom, and dad Mike began to suspect he was stealing food and hurting their daughter at night. So they started to restrain him. I feel the need to point out that he was only 3 years old. Later that year, in December 2011, DCF investigated 2 hotline calls about abuse in the Jones home, including Adrian. As a result of these calls, DCF asked Michael Jones to sign a document promising to keep his children safe from physical abuse, not to use physical discipline, and not allow his spouse, Heather Jones, to have contact with the children. Heather had moved out of the home at this time, so Mike signed the piece of paper, a promise to behave. Effective. In what world? By January 2012, Michael Jones admitted that he and Heather Jones were back together and she was welcome to visit his home. Even though he signed a paper and pinky promise to not have her around the children, he did tell them she was coming around again. They had identified her as a problem. He said she was coming around again, and they did nothing. During this time, the Jones family had a live-in nanny. The nanny would say, quote, "I love that little boy so much. He was so sweet, and those big eyes just filled with wonderment, very inquisitive, and begged for love and attention," unquote. She lived with the Jones in 2012. There was a disparity between the children. The two young ones were treated much better by Heather than the three older ones. Those were not her kids. Although the babysitter only witnessed one spanking, Patricia said there was abuse against the 4-year-old boy, which was Adrian. He was given chores that were way above his young capabilities. She could tell it was true prejudice against Adrian. One example given was that he would have to chop wood in the winter, and her punishments for Adrian were cruel, according to her. He would end up in the bedroom with his nose up against the wall and his head up in the air and would have to stand there for hours. She said he wasn't allowed to eat with the girls because there was Adrian and then there was 6 other girls. So Adrian was the only boy. The nanny babysitter would continue to say, "It is a sad situation that I couldn't do anything about." I don't know if she said there's nothing that she could do about it because she was the one that made the calls to CPS, but she was pretty confident in that statement saying that there was nothing she could do. So I'm assuming that she did everything that she could. So when the nanny reflected 3 years later, she feels guilt because she couldn't take the children out of what she calls a dangerous situation. She would say, quote, "Those kids needed someone to love them. It breaks my heart for him," she said. And I think that's why none of the kids ever went to school, is because they saw too much, the nanny would say. Mike Jones in 2012 filed a homeschool with the state of Kansas called the Jones Academy. But Patricia said there wasn't much learning going on. Education was absolutely not important to the Jones family. In 2012, Mike Jones' older daughter was in 1st grade in the Topeka Public Schools until she began attending the Jones Academy, where assigning chores was more important than assigning schoolwork. The babysitter would say, "I was the one in charge of their homeschooling. We would be able to spend maybe a couple of hours at most. And then all of the sudden, she would be needed to do something else. She barely knew the alphabet," said the nanny. So I have mentioned homeschool in the past and how parents who have open investigations or have had prior abuse charges against them, kids are removed from the home, that they should not be allowed to homeschool because it's a way to isolate the child. Based on some information that I looked up, it's called CASA, Court Appointed Special Advocates. So this is Executive Director Martha Gersom says, "We have no evidence that children who are homeschooled are more likely to be abused or neglected, but we do know that teachers, counselors, and school nurses are a great source of comfort to children, and sometimes this is when abuse is disclosed. Since the pandemic, we've had a huge number of children being homeschooled," unquote. So that was her just giving her thoughts on the topic. You guys let me know your thoughts down in the comments. In December 2012, DCF investigated another hotline call about child abuse in the Jones home, but did not remove Adrian from the home. During this time, Adrian's grandmother, Judy Conway, was reaching out to Michael to see or talk to her grandkids. He never responded to her calls. Between December 2012 and March 2013, Adrian and his family moved to Missouri. Just to be clear, where the Jones lived was right on the Kansas-Missouri border. So you could literally move into a home across the street and it was in a different state. It was very, very close. So when the Joneses moved to Missouri, then the Missouri Department of Child Services, DSS, started getting hotline calls as well. On March 4th, 2013, the DSS received a hotline call reporting that Adrian had been forced to stand in the corner for over an hour and punished and had been forgotten about. Adrian had locks on the outside of his bedroom door, and Adrian was reported to be starting fires. And on top of that, the garage at the house had dead animals in it, and the house was filthy with mice and chicken bones. Disgusting. The following day, DSS requested history from Kansas DCF on Heather Jones. It's two different departments, two different names. Sorry if it's confusing, but on April 7th, 2013, Kansas DCF provided Missouri DSS with 7 pages of type reports on Heather Jones, which referenced a history of failing to supervise children in her care, children being removed from her care because of physical abuse, and an incident where she shot herself in the foot. On July 18th, 2013, DSS determined Adrian was unsafe in the Jones home. As a result, DSS attempted to provide intensive in-home services, IIS, and family-centered services, FCS, to the family. On August 1st, 2013, following 2 IIS visits, Michael and Heather Jones informed they're moving to Kansas and would no longer meet with DSS. So they are now moving again. On August 9, 2013, a Missouri caseworker made a hotline call to Kansas to report the IIS and FCS cases opened in Missouri, the fact that Jones were no longer cooperating because they now resided in Kansas, and expressed her concerns for Adrian. Following the call, Kansas contacted the Joneses and were told by the Joneses that they are now going to continue to live in Missouri. So Missouri has a problem with them, identifies them as possible abusers. They tell Missouri, we are moving to Kansas. Missouri then contacts Kansas, and the Jones say, no, we're now going to stay in Missouri. So it's like a dog chasing their tail. And this whole time, poor Adrian is losing weight, like a lot of weight, and has visible marks and scars on his body. On August 21st, 2013, DSS received a hotline call reporting that Adrian's medical and mental needs are not being provided for. Also, Adrian was locked in his room at night, and Adrian was being targeted by Heather Jones. Kansas was notified by this hotline call. In response, Missouri caseworker visited the Joneses' home in Missouri, where Heather Jones denied telling Missouri the Jones were going to be moving to Kansas. You guys, if you are keeping this straight, you are better than I, and I can see it. I visually can see what's going on, and it is so confusing. In a nutshell, I'm moving, I'm not moving. Kansas, Missouri, it's caught in the middle, and that's where we stand. There you go, in a nutshell. What has to happen for Adrian to be removed? You have 2 departments working on this case, but it almost seems like nothing's happening. Because this is the whole report from that day, this report came straight from the lawsuit filed by the state of Missouri. So these are their own words that Adrian was vulnerable to abuse and neglect. On March 3rd, 2014, the Missouri caseworker, with assistance of Missouri law enforcement, went to the Jones home in Missouri, where they observed Adrian had suspicious marks on him. So now they have made contact with him. They physically see him. They see marks on him. Lots of calls, a lot of he said, she said, two states pointing the finger at each other. Okay, they're going to remove him now, right? No such luck. The next information comes in early 2014. Missouri referred Adrian to Family Guidance Center for placement and mental health services. The Family Guidance Center subsequently placed Adrian in Spofford Residential Treatment Center, which was in Grandview, Missouri. He was there from March 7, 2014 until September 4, 2014. So from March to September, little Adrian had a moment of peace. Probably the only peace he's ever received in his life. He must have been over the moon to go here. On August 28, 2014, Missouri received another hotline call reporting that Adrian would soon be discharged from the center to his father, Mike Jones, but that the Jones are still unwilling to meet Adrian's needs. Mike Jones was not returning any phone calls and was not cooperating with Adrian's mental health treatment. The call reported that Mike Jones' address was in Kansas City, Kansas. Mike Jones had reported he was not interested in Adrian's mental health. He was not going to cooperate and any of their plans. But still, Adrian was returned to his care. Based on what we know so far, Mike ran the show. They said don't have Heather around. He said that's not going to happen, and they accept it. They tell him to follow up on his mental health and the other requirements, and he basically tells them no and does nothing, and there's no consequences. In October of 2014, Kansas filed an action to collect child support on Adrian's behalf. This was for Wyandotte County in Kansas. They were collecting these funds from Diana Pierce, Adrian's biological mom. Michael had been receiving state assistance, aka welfare, for Adrian while in his care. When you receive state assistance, the state will try to recoup the money from the other parent. On November 25th, 2015, Detective Lancaster reported to an aggravated assault at the Joneses' home. Now they live in Kansas. Upon arrival, he made contact with Heather Jones, who was identified as the victim. He learned that an unnamed man had called 911 on Heather's behalf because her husband was attacking her. Heather said she had been arguing with her husband, Mike, since the night prior when she told him she was going to leave him. She said he choked her, threw her against a wall, and tried to shoot her. Mike had left in his truck but was found down the street and was arrested. When asked about the incident, Mike said yes. He had picked her up by her throat. He said she couldn't stop running her mouth and disrespecting him. He said he took his Glock outside and fired a few times to blow off some steam. It was apparent to the officers that there had been a fight. Heather's neck was red. She also had cuts on her forehead and face. It was swollen, and she had a bruise under her right eye. They took Mike to be booked for assault. She went to the hospital. Additionally, Heather stated that she checked the internet search history on Mike's phone and discovered that he had searched odorless, colorless poison. Detective Lancaster asked Mike about this during his interview, and he said that he saw a story on a crime show and he searched it because he was thinking about doing that to Heather. You have to appreciate his honesty. Yeah, I wanted to poison her. I wish he would have poisoned her. Is that bad? I don't know if that's bad or not, or I should say that. I take it back. Kinda. But this would just be the beginning of what Mike would say. In the meantime, Heather tells the detectives she has something on Mike that will keep him in jail forever. That's when she tells them there is another child, a boy, Adrian, in the mix. Before, the detectives that day only knew about the 6 girls in the home. So she tells the detectives that when Adrian came to live with them when he was about 2.5, 3 years old. She tells the detectives that Adrian liked to hurt little girls, and they had 6 of them, so they had to separate and restrain him from everyone else. Please help me make sense of that. Mike had an affliction with boys in the family. He was said to abuse Joanne's children. She had a couple of boys, either 1 or 2, and Adrian and her boys got it the worst. The girls were not as bad. Heather would continue to describe months of abuse, restraining him and keeping him isolated from the rest of the family. These methods included strapping him to a crib mattress, handcuffing and shackling Adrian in his bedroom closet, and attaching him to an inversion table. Each of these methods was implemented for hours or even days at a time, whether Adrian was sleeping or awake. Starting May 2015, Mike kept Adrian in the shower stall in the bathroom of the master bedroom to keep him from escaping. The shower door was replaced with plywood and a camera was installed in the shower with monitoring in the home over Wi-Fi. During this time, Adrian was not allowed to wear clothes because he urinated and defecated on himself, she would say. They held the plywood in place by wedging a shower rod in place. Sometimes Mike forgot to put the rod in place, and Adrian would get out and steal food. He was less than 7 years old, starving, and they describe him as stealing food. And I think they honestly believe their own crap. In fact, Heather often referenced Adrian as one that stole food, and that was a problem within the home. When Adrian stole food, Heather would take him to Mike, knowing full well severe punishment awaited. Heather claimed Mike would hit Adrian as if he were a grown man with a full closed fist. Mike was 6'2", 240 pounds, used steroids, and worked out. Adrian was not allowed to come out of the stall to eat or use the bathroom. He was kept with no clothes in this cold bathroom shower stall. Mike would discipline Adrian by kicking him into the swimming pool in the backyard. Adrian received a gash-like injury during one of these punishments, and Heather sewed his gash up herself using her medical kit, but not before she took pictures of her work and sent them to Mike. Heather and Mike both liked to document Adrian's torture. Many videos and pictures were recovered. She would continue to say that on one occasion that Mike allowed her access to Adrian, she saw his arms, legs, and ankles were swollen. She thought he had internal bleeding. Heather claimed to have military medical training. No evidence is found of this or any job history at all for her. Heather agreed to go with Detective Lancaster to the home to find certain items. While they were there, she explained a bit more about Adrian, but remember, the police don't know that the photos and the videos exist at this point. At the house, Heather told the detectives to locate a black suitcase they kept Adrian in. They put him in this suitcase, zipped it up with only his head sticking out of the top. Heather said the suitcase had been soaked with Adrian's urine. Detective Lancaster asked Heather if Adrian would resist or fight being placed into these restraint devices like the suitcase. Heather casually said that Adrian liked being in the suitcase because it was warm in there. The detective would find the black suitcase in the hall closet. Heather told a Christmas story. Remember December 25th, 2014, Christmas Day 2014. She said that she snuck a plate of food to Adrian, because she's such of a kind person. And he ate with his food sitting on his lap in the closet. When asked what Mike did when he found out that she had snuck him a plate of food, Heather pulled out a partial denture from the front upper tooth, claiming Mike knocked her tooth out. Mike later denied this, stating that she had them removed for medical reasons and provided the dentist's info. More importantly, in a follow-up interview, Heather gave a completely different version of Mike knocking out her tooth. It was a complete lie. Heather states at this point, Adrian spent the last 8 months of his life in the shower. For a while, he was able to get out because he was able to remove the screws. To prevent that, they put the plywood in place with the rod. If he was out, it was in full view of Heather and Mike, always being made to keep his arms up and out, not touching himself in any way. Heather and Mike started beating him and stopping him severely. At some point, about a week before his death, Adrian could no longer stand on his own. They placed a lawn chair in the shower and wrapped bandages around his little body to hold him in place. Heather stated Adrian was naked, cold, in a dark, alone, and severely ill. I wonder if her military training told her that she and Mike were killing him slowly. Then Heather showed them where the taser flashlight was and let the CSI team collect it. She didn't touch it at the time. Heather spoke about Mike using the taser, but eventually said that yes, she used it on him routinely. She stated she shocked him daily and that those shocks lasted for several seconds at a time. Heather spoke of sparking the weapon to scare Adrian and place him in fear. Heather described when he heard it, Adrian falling to the floor and curling up in fear of the use of this taser. The detectives showed Heather 2 pictures, and Heather just stared at them. These were pictures that she took and sent to Michael. She loved sending pictures to Michael to show off her work. She was proud, and Michael approved of this behavior. The 2 pictures she was shown were found on Michael's phone that Heather had sent him. She stated that all the discolorations on Adrian's body shown in the picture are from this taser. Heather knew that more pain was caused if the contacts of the weapon were held away from Adrian's skin. This caused a much louder spark and burns on the skin. If she held the contacts to his skin, it would leave the same marks but not burn as much. This should tell you how often and how familiar she is with this weapon and the escalation of abuse. Detective Lancaster pointed to the same burn pattern on Adrian's growing area. Heather stated that it was a burn pattern from the taser. Heather said Adrian was shocked in that area for touching his boy parts. She states the last time she saw Adrian was about a week before she saw him dead in the shower. She had to tie him to the chair because he could no longer sit on his own. She said at this time, Mike had needed to hold the water bottle for Adrian so he could get a drink of water because he couldn't drink on his own anymore, even hold his head up for that matter. Heather admitted she knew he was gravely ill. I guess again, that was her military training, and hoped he would get better. She knew without medical intervention, he was going to die. They did nothing. She stated that her and Mike were too afraid to take him to the hospital because they would be charged with child abuse. Heather said she knew she was being selfish and that she also did not help because she was protecting Mike. While showing a photo of Adrian, the detective asked why she hated this little boy, Adrian, so much. A logical question. Why, Heather? Heather began crying and pointed at Adrian's picture and stated That boy is the reason I lost my son. Heather explained that Adrian had lied to DCF during a 2011 investigation, and as a result, her biological son was taken away from her. I could not find any information about this son, but she claimed he was taken away. During the investigation, the rest of the children were removed from Heather Jones's custody and were forensically interviewed at the Sunflower House. One of the 6 sisters who say she could not remember how long it had been since she'd seen Adrian, but his hands and feet were always swollen. She knew he was kept in the shower, and she could hear him yelling through the vents, saying, "I'm going to die. I'm going to die." She saw Heather hit and kick him. He had a hard time walking because his legs and feet were so swollen. She heard Heather say to him, "Suck it up." Initially, Heather told detectives she believed Mike had killed Adrian and got rid of his body, but she didn't know any more than that. She said that she never saw Adrian after he died and that Mike told her he was at the hospital. Eventually, she said Mike came to her and said, "We've got a problem." He led her to the shower where she checked his pulse, Adrian's pulse, and immediately knew he was dead. She said she could swear he had a smile on his face. Heather is a very, very sick person. After Adrian died, Mike bought a tiller from Lowe's, in which he returned 2 days later. Heather eventually arranged for them to purchase pigs. I say eventually because she admitted Adrian's body stayed in the house for up to 2 weeks before his body was removed from that shower. During the interview with Mike, the detective found out that on or about September 28, 2015, Adrian had died, and Mike had disposed of his body by feeding him to unfed pigs. He also stated that he retrieved his remains when the pigs were done, mostly bones of Adrian, and placed them in a tub with a pink lid, and that was found in the barn where the pigs were kept. Mike Jones provided written consent to search his phone. Over 80 images and videos showing Adrian's abuse and punishments were found. His injuries, his extreme starvation, and removal of the shower that he was imprisoned and died in. Adrian's date of death comes from text message exchanges between Mike and Heather. Detectives noticed the shower had been demolished down to the stud wall. Heather said that they had to do that after Adrian passed. Portions of the wall and tiles were found near a burn pile out back. Heather pointed to the lawn chair by the fence in the backyard and said Adrian had spent his last week of his life in one that looked identical to it. They found pieces of a similar lawn chair, broken lawn chair, over by the burn pile. So clearly they were getting a lot of evidence. On November 27th, Dr. Eric Mitchell performed the autopsy on the human remains that were found intact. An intact skull, a jaw, both femurs, rib bones, not a lot to go on. No cause of death or sex could be determined initially. When the autopsy was complete, they were able to identify the remains as Adrian's. When Heather was arrested in connection with Adrian's death, she reached out to her landlady and asked if she would go to her house and save some photos of her and the kids off of her computer for her. She told the landlord, Jennifer Hoovers, that she would see pictures of Adrian, but to just ignore those. So Heather gave Jennifer access to her iCloud and all of her Facebook groups, passwords, all of it. When Jennifer arrived at the house, she was stunned. She and her husband had used up all their savings to invest in this rental property. They made it into something, and they thought the Joneses were a good family to rent to. But when she opened that door, she was shocked. There was fast food wrappers, trash, milk bottles, food particle boxes, trash bags all over the floor. Every counter space was covered with junk and trash. There were countless cages of rats, some living, some dead. There were boxes of needles and boxes of porn. The house was a complete wreck. She didn't know the details of what was going on with Adrian yet, but she, as a mom, did not know how anyone could raise kids in a home like this. Heather and Mike had 7 children living there, and as she's walking through, she finds something odd. In one of the 4 bedrooms, she finds a mattress with some mail on it, and the mail was addressed to Willie Flowers. Later, Heather will verify that Mike's uncle had been living with them. So, Heather, Mike, Willie, 7 kids, rats, pigs, and cats all in the house and full of trash. Now it's identified that there was another adult in the house, Willie Flowers. Why didn't Willie walk into a police station and say, I have 2 people that are starving and torturing a child to death? Please help me. Adrian needed him. And as someone standing by watching it happen, you are as guilty. But the state of Kansas disagrees. The community was in a rage about the inaction of Willie. So Willie moved and made a statement. He said he just wants to be left alone. Willie, hey you. I really hope you see this. What do you think Adrian wanted? Maybe he wanted to be left alone. So back to the landlady. She logs into Heather's iCloud, and she's in for images that will probably haunt her for the rest of her life. She finds the sweet pictures of Heather and Mike with their 6 daughters, and some even of the family dog, Gunner, that got taken away. Gunner got lucky. But then she starts finding pictures of Adrian. Many pictures of various restraint methods they were thinking about for Adrian, to include inversion tables, straitjackets, restraint beds, restraint belts, full body enclosures, and a restraint band. They repeatedly disclosed how they restrained Adrian, including handcuffs, shackles, ace bandages, and straps. There are videos too. The videos of Adrian at night in hardly any clothes, outside in the winter, handcuffed and tied up like a family pet. He is trying to eat something using only his mouth because his hands are cuffed behind his back. And you can hear Heather in the background laughing because the kids put dirt and bugs in his applesauce that they were feeding him. Jennifer, in a panic, she left the house. She went home and thought about it for the night. The next morning, she took a copy of the photos and the video to the police, and she contacted Adrian's grandmother so she could have a copy to prepare for trial, if it's even possible. After receiving the Facebook photo information from Jennifer, the police submitted a preservation request to Facebook. Basically, it asked them to preserve evidence from the date you request it, so the information can't be deleted. The detectives were also contacted by a former friend of Heather's. She said she used to be part of the Facebook group Heather was in, but it was too terrible for her, so she left. But she knows someone who still has access to it, so she gave the police that information. The person met with the police and showed them Heather's post. This is from that Christmas day that you were going to remember, the whole plate of food thing. These are her posts. I have a psychopath I'm giving away for free. He broke out last night and fucked my kitchen and everything I baked up. I'm beyond pissed, and he's still running laps around my pool and doing push-ups till I'm tired unless someone wants him. And then Heather replies to her own post, I can't shoot him, unfortunately, but I can work the shit out of him till I feel better. And Merry Christmas to you. She makes another post. I'm so beyond done with this kid. Last night, he chased me with a fucking knife, trying to stab me till I jumped the counter in pain and tackled his ass. Y'all sure you don't want him? I'll pay child support. Another post. Seriously, he's for real a psychopath. I'm so not kidding. Every day with this kid is being, I don't know, whatever. Another post. His bio mommed F this kid up, like seriously. He's killed everything he comes in contact with and has to be restrained 95% of the time. Another post. Someone actually posted to her, like in a response, Heather, is this the push-up kid, LMFAO, from your security camera? When I was like, what the F is that? Poor kid, and God bless you for taking him in. Ugh. Heather replies to that, Merry Christmas, but I can't take him. Would have no problem putting a carol and having him look at flowers. Someone posted to her, the flowers in the attic. Heather replies to that post, Walking Dead. Look at the pretty flowers. Yeah, about to pull that. Again, like not even 8 minutes ago, he flipped my 4-month-old out of her bassinet while I went pee. When she was talking about the flower thing, smell the flower deal, Detective Lancaster recognized this as an obvious reference to episode 14, season 4 of The Walking Dead, titled The Grove, which originally aired in 2014. Carol decides the juvenile character Lizzie has become too dangerous after she had killed another child, Mika. Carol decides she has to kill Lizzie. Carol walks Lizzie to a flower bed and tells her 3 times, just look at the flowers, and then she shoots her in the head. Heather then replies to a photo that she posted to one of the members in the group. She says, scared to look at my phone, afraid I might be the next Melissa Pinson and have to feed some pigs a body. Wouldn't you know it, that's exactly what she did just over 6 months later. A real criminal mastermind. Post it on Facebook and then do it. At this point, the police have an overwhelming amount of evidence. Adrian was certainly failed. He was failed by his parents. He was failed by our CPS system. Adrian was failed all around. And this is just another example of why we need an interstate CPS system. Both Mike and Heather Jones were charged with first-degree murder. Michael Jones pled guilty to felony first-degree murder and received life in prison with an eligibility of parole in 25 years. Adrian was a Kansas resident at the time he died, and his remains were found in Kansas. State of Kansas and state of Missouri both have lawsuits pending for this case. The judgments have not been disclosed. Heather Jones pled guilty to first-degree murder and received life in prison with an eligibility of parole in 25 years. She also got 5 years and 8 months for 2 child abuse charges. Judy Conway, Adrian's grandmother, worked very hard on Adrian's law, and it was passed in May of 2021, not that long ago. It basically says that every child that is reported to be abused or neglected must be physically seen by a representative of CPS or a police officer. Can you believe this wasn't the case before? 2021, last year. A caseworker could show up to your house, not see the kid, leave, and close the case. This law also makes it a criminal offense to see child abuse and not report it, which is because of Willie Flowers. But can you believe this was just last year? You mean to tell me it was okay, they didn't find it valuable to pass a law that if you see a child being abused, you need to report it? I mean, it shouldn't even be a law. It should be just common sense. But it seems as if Adrian did not have a good time at life from the very beginning. Going through this story, as you heard, the only break Adrian had is when he was in that center, that program, for that couple of months. I hope that Adrian's siblings are safe and happy in their new home. I hope they find peace knowing that he saved them. He literally saved them from the worst monsters they could possibly be around. Just pure evil. Let's leave a football for Adrian's favorite sport in the comments. Adrian's life should not be forgotten, and more people should hear about his life. Thanks to all my channel members who continue to support me. Their names are on the screen. If you would like early access to new videos and decide the cases I cover next, you can do so by clicking the join button from your desktop, or if there is a video in the description box on how to do it from your phone. Well, if you guys have made it to the end, you guys are rock stars and I love you to death. There are more true crime videos in my Crimey Stories playlist for you to check out. Stay safe, my loves, and remember, if you see something, say something. Please do not be a Willy Flowers. I'll see you in my next one. Bye.